Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Writers series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, currently now all online. For more information about our upcoming events, our website is wab.org. We're so happy to have Lucia LoTempio with us tonight. Lucia is the author of Hot with the Bad Things, a lyric sequence that focuses on how we talk about violence against women, particularly interrogating how a woman lives within that violence. Her work weaves memoir and poetry in its conception of memory, trauma, and the language of violence. You can find her poems in Passages North, the journal TYPO, Quarterly West, and as a part of the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, and elsewhere. She lives and writes in Pittsburgh. First, we'll hear from Lucia, then we'll talk about her work. If you'd like to submit a question, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can purchase her book at our bookstore, Ampersand Books, and I'll also mention she's teaching an online workshop on hybrid forms this Saturday. I'll put both those links in the chat. Lucia, thank you for being here.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for that intro, Dan. And thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm really excited to be doing a reading with Writers and Books, especially like maybe not way back in the day. How old am I? Back in the day, I was an intern at Writers and Books. So I'm really glad to be, I don't know, with you all virtually. So I'm going to read, like Dan said, from my book, Hot with the Bad Things. And let me just see if I can. Okay. I'm going to read from my book. But before I do, I wanted to actually read a poem from Louise Glick's Averno. She, as of today, was named or received the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I want to read a poem particularly from Averno because I use a line from it as an epigraph in my book. So this is A Myth of Devotion by Louise Glick. When Hades decided he loved this girl, he built for her a duplicate of Earth. Everything the same down to the meadow, but with a bed added. Everything the same, including sunlight, because it would be hard on a young girl to go so quickly from bright light to utter darkness. Gradually, he thought, he'd introduce the night, first as the shadows of fluttering leaves, then moon, then stars, then no moon, no stars. Let Persephone get used to it slowly. In the end, he thought, she'd find it comforting, a replica of Earth, except there was love here. Doesn't everyone want love? He waited many years, building a world, watching Persephone in the meadow, Persephone, a smeller, a taster. If you have one appetite, he thought, you have them all. Doesn't everyone want to feel in the night the beloved body, compass, pole star, to hear the quiet breathing that says, I am alive? That means also you are alive, because you hear me. You are here with me. And when one turns, the other turns. That's what he felt, the Lord of Darkness. He had constructed for Persephone. It never crossed his mind that there'd be no more smelling here, certainly no more eating. Guilt, terror, the fear of love, these things he couldn't imagine. No lover ever imagines them. He dreams, he wonders what to call this place. First he thinks, the new hell, then the garden. In the end, he decides to name it Persephone's girlhood, a soft light rising above the level meadow behind the bed. He takes her in his arms. He wants to say, I love you. Nothing can hurt you. But he thinks, this is a lie. So he says in the end, you're dead. Nothing can hurt you, which seems to him a more promising beginning, more true. So I liked, well, okay, I love this book, Averno, and it's one of my favorite books on a readerly level. And when I was writing Hot with the Bad Things, I was thinking a lot about the way Glick moves through relationship in the book. And it was really inspirational in beginning to write Hot with the Bad Things. And I think too, it was an early inspiration in terms of where I wanted the craft of the book to go. I think another early inspiration I would say is Maggie Nelson's Bluettes, especially the way she weaves in sort of research and critical theory. If you're not familiar with her work, she often will like quote other sources within her poems. And ultimately that's not where my book Hot with the Bad Things went, but that really got me thinking about, okay, how can I move beyond the genre of poetry? How can I explore other ways of expression? And that really got me started to think about prose poems, and not only prose poems, but other ways of expressing. And I'm also, I want to talk about these hybrid forms because, as Dan mentioned, I'm teaching a masterclass with writers and books this Saturday on hybrid forms. So if you're really interested in this, I would love for you to join us this Saturday. I think there'll be a link in the chat as well. But some other forms, right, like this section that the Glick epigraph begins, has these sort of letter fragments in them. And also, I have, if you can see this like dot that permeates the collection. So let me read some poems from Hot with the Bad Things from that section of letters. I will say also much of the book is speaking back to a younger self, and these letters come from the perspective of that younger self. So, epigraph from Louise Glick. He built for her a duplicate of earth, everything the same down to the meadow, but with a bed added. Geneseo, New York. He says my love grows from a big space to an even bigger one. This is what happens when you're sure. It's a fear full of loss. I'm standing at the ledge and he is a balloon I'm afraid to drop. Totally ignorant that he would just float. A perfect pressure. Just in front of my face. So close I could smell the latex. One day you'll see that these letters are full of love for you, too. And there will be so much you'll want to suck out of them, like pomegranate, juice and seeds 6 in your palm. So I guess another little bit to say is I only recently started reading from these because they come from like a 19-year-old self, and they're like sort of purposely a bit cringy, a bit earnest. But I've been having fun reading from them, so I'll read maybe 1 or 2 more. Geneseo, New York. Yesterday he said to me, of course I love you. You're my Lucia. I don't mean to be a portrait of a romantic knowing parts, but there were things done to him he can't even say. Do you remember just before New Year's when you sat on the carpet behind his bench, and the first thing he did was open the music to the symphony you loved? Shh, I'm doing art now. Geneseo, New York. I went and saw that girl from high school in her dorm across campus. She was like, damn, Lucia, when I did some of the Nikki part of Roman's Revenge. Probably because she thinks I'm a virgin. Last week, he finally did it with me on the basement carpet, which was rough and gave me a crazy brush burn. In the hustle, I wrote, "The body regenerates at such a pace, curdling reminders until it tries to forget for you, shed, layer, tighten. But I hooked the scab on my back, big and purple as a plum, scars, soon." All right, so I'm gonna pop out earlier in the book. As I mentioned, I'm really sort of doing a lot of exploration with genre, and the book itself is a lyric sequence of prose poems that are totally untitled. And I also mentioned that dot, that blot that permeates much of the book. You know, it's interesting because when I started doing these sort of Zoom readings, I thought, you know, okay, how am I gonna like show that black circle, which again, I'll just show you on the page if I can. You see it right there. Because when I read in person, I'll gesture to the audience and the audience will clap or stomp or make some sort of noise. And I thought, oh, I'll like cut out my camera at those moments to create that sense of rupture, but it hasn't really worked. So I don't know if anyone has any ideas. I'd love to hear them. All right. One summer, I bought a plant at the farmer's market. When I took the money from my bra, the man smirked at me. I most likely killed it. A climate of fear is both counting cards and laying its hand on the table. There was a debate on campus about the semantics of no means no. Two philosophy professors in the quay under a sagging hoop. Most of the women left before the Q&A. Outside the department in the smoking pen, a man chastised his friend. It's not bitches, they're females. Something groaned, a sickness hollowing. I heard to pledge a girl had to hold a carrot in her vagina, tuft of greenish mud leaf. The bus driver let the girl with no money on, then told her she'd have better luck lying in the bed of a pickup truck. The jangling of an empty ambulance, the only concern with the driver is a matter of heroics. At orientation, they told us to go prone if a man put his hand on us. He laughed because he knew. Thought, if it doesn't happen to me, that's okay. I used to want the punchline at the beginning of the joke. I used to fold paper into boats, and the story that followed had to do with sinking. I had so much I wanted to say, it feels like I've forgotten it all. It's TV static or a white noise machine. It's still a scene thing. It's still noise. Little mouse, it's hard to tell if you're fearful of what and if it's your fear to be had. I see you shake, but is that your blood or the way my eyes are darting? The other day, my friend spoke beautifully on gold. I forget now, and it's just right beside me. On the bus, after he touched me, the man moved his hand to my arm, gently, sincerely, said, I am so sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna read now from the ending section. And I suppose it's actually maybe, especially if we have, you know, some Western New Yorkers on the call now, it's probably important to know that this book really started from, I went to school at SUNY Geneseo. And, you know, in the mid-teens in Geneseo, a man murdered his ex-girlfriend and another man, sort of not on Geneseo's campus, but they were, you know, all students or former students, like right off the campus. And if you're from Western New York, you might remember, you most likely remember that crime and that tragedy, but you might also remember the response to that event. And that's really, for me, where the book started, was seeing the way, you know, people were talking about it online. And you know, it was interesting to me the way we're so almost like excited, invested in having some sort of connection to something else, even when it's something, so violent and so tragic. And so that's where the book really started. So I'm going to read through to the end, and I think that there are definitely moments that make mention of Geneseo. All right. The mouth opens like it's just blunt entry. I want to have sex with what I want to become, says the poet. I think I should feel very broken down, very rotten, but I am open like the hull of a ship with stairs ascending. When I see a grease fire, it's a trash fire, it's a car engine fire, it's on the belly of a great lake. I'm always looking for solution, but an equation would be too elegant. Siri says, "Thank you for your feedback," when you call her naughty girl. I know I shouldn't be filling any cup to splash. When I say grease fire, I mean nothing else. I mean grease fire. I tell my lover to throw me onto the bed, and he refuses. What happens when you are hot with the bad things? When I was younger, I felt a tenderness that was uninterrupted. Now, when I feel it coming on, I think I know where it started. When I open, I need to know who, or when my mouth opens, it's full of fire and still so hungry. A man I know posted a documentary about any campus, #rewatching. When I watched that film, I was so mad. I already knew everything they told me. Who was that for? Who are these poems for? A hashtag has an edge. Lead me out, red exit neon when the tacit applause comes. There are so many things he did to me, and I don't want to just say. My small, small self, my little warm nub. I see your dead body everywhere, flat on cement, spread eagle and pulled to a point where your paws should be. Sometimes waterlogged, and others black matted mud. It's still coming. It's still happening, even when I step over you and look at the sky. Okay, I think just 2 or 3 more. A little moss on the wall. How do I tell him? Every time a man touches, it's better with the promise of worse. I love a man. How do I tell him? My mother says I don't seem happy at all. He forgets to lock the door at night. How do I tell him? A sweet mass of something big that presses. Life is amazing, I say when a friend asks. How do I tell him? I'm kneeling on a chair, wobble and sweat. Life is amazing. I repeat louder, then louder, then louder, then louder, and believe it. Small death, small shame. Photograph of a small room emptied. Portrait of women killing Orpheus, body small in death, in pieces. I did not find pleasure in that, a small death. Do you feel shame when you are dead? Something always lives on, small. When you are dead, know this hand is yours. No one comes to claim it. Told me a rape is a small death. Something still lives, a blasphemous love for myself and not dead or small. There is nothing triumphant about red rising like next day. Still, I bring a strange hand to my lip and say this. I tell my friends we are so quick to forget pleasure, and then we bring up poems we hate. Hate is a kind of pleasure. When people post the man, they mention, this is how many hills I was from the unlocked back door. There is an exquisite joy in climbing a hill. What can be blotted out? A man, a name, a life? I'm trying and nothing seems to be working. Is anything lost in memoriam with a tweet? Is connection a kind of joy? I am tired and still watching. I want her alive, point to her, be able to see this. I want to find a younger me, tell her this. I want to write a poem that says this. All right, last one. Another shared article, collaged photographs that don't match. Her lover, her, the murderer, the house, grass peeked through snow, red garland forgotten. Two people bundled. From the side, they look so close together, legs in sync. Like this one, a woman, and the other, a shadow. The bear on the fountain in the center of Geneseo, like a pit in a peach. Like the stomach of a body. A truck hit it last winter, then another a month later, and again last week. When I go back, it won't be there. It'll be like I'm not going back at all. A silly hope. As if everything that ever happens in a place has an edge, like an aerial shot of it. That memory could be stilled, then framed, like a penned up animal. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, now we'll open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can submit it through the Q&A function. I wanted to ask you, so how did you decide on this hybrid form? You talked a little bit about trying to go beyond poetry. And it seems to me like the cycling through these different forms it's almost like the language is trying to find a way to talk about these things and all kind of taking different angles. I'm just curious how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I love your analysis of like sort of cycling through to like find a way to express. That was definitely the experience in that circle up, like I always call it like the blot that goes throughout the book. That really was like a moment of, okay, how do I sort of express this rupture? How do I show or express this idea that something is unsayable? And that was like sort of through different edits, through different phrasing, I was like, okay, it's like almost like I'm trying to say too much. I wish I just had like a like an image to fill in the blank. And so with that, it was important to me too that it wasn't an empty space. It was definitely, there, but not there. That it wasn't like an erasure, but more of something covered up. And then in terms of like thinking through like a hybrid form with prose, as I was writing the book, it started out first just as a really long poem, just like a 4-page long poem. And I had a teacher who said, okay, this is like bigger than this even, and you need to keep writing it, you need to keep going. And so the more I wrote, the longer the poem got, and like to the point, of course, that it became a book. It just having it be in prose was actually really freeing, because it offered some sort of cohesion, but it also, in the language for me, it offered like more opportunity both to be like really exploratory and surreal, but also to be, narrative in a way that gave it like a more ease of flow, I suppose. Yeah.
It's really interesting, yeah, especially about the blot, as you call it. It seems like it's almost like this black hole at the center that's sort of there and taking up a lot of gravity, I guess.
Yeah, that's also, that, thank you for saying that. That's something that was going through my mind too, of like all the different ways that it encapsulated that feeling of something that, yeah, you want to pretend isn't there, but it still is, and it's still like, yeah, like that gravitational pull still pulls you in. It feels like you can almost dive into it, but at the same time, it's something obscured and something that is more of a wish to be erased than actually erased.
I think it was really interesting. You started with those letter poems, reading the book, there's a lot of talk about violence and sexual violence against women. And then in the middle, there's these very sweet letters. I'm just curious about the decision to conclude those in the middle.
Yeah, first of all, writing a book is really an individual thing, but it also is like, oh my God, you have so many, if you're lucky, as I feel I was lucky, you have so many people who are able to, help you edit and really help you dig deeper and think a lot more deeply. And those letter poems were also a different teacher, the poet Yona Harvey, recommended. I was writing all these poems, like speaking back to this younger self, but and it was like really from this position of like, I have knowledge now and you did not have knowledge then, which, I suppose is fine. But she recommended, okay, well, what is this, like, where is this 19-year-old coming from? And that's where I started writing those letters. And a lot of it I lifted from like poems that I wrote when I was 19 and, journal entries and even like, weirdly enough, tweets that I had written when I was 19, to really get that sense. And it was like an interesting balance, because I wanted it to have that earnestness, and I wanted it to be, I mentioned, it's kind of cringy, and I kind of wanted it to be a little cringy, but I didn't want it to be campy. I wanted it to have like a heart to it that was earnest. And so, yeah, I've only recently started reading from them, as I mentioned too, because they're like almost like for a while they were like difficult for me to like look at. It's like looking at a younger, like if you look at your old diary entries, you're like, oh my God, like this is like, no, thank you. Mm-hmm. But I've like sort of come back around to appreciating them more. And I had other editors who said, oh, take these out, they're too uncomfortable. But that like uncomfortableness, I think, was really important to, like the heart of this book.
Yeah. We have some questions from Allison. She says, I experienced the poems as being written in more than one voice. Is that a fair reading?
Hi, Allison. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I guess yes and no. Yes, it's definitely a fair reading, especially I think the way I think about it through time and like the speaker experiencing different moments of time, and moments of sort of self-realization and self-actualization. I definitely feel that sort of section to section, the speaker really being altered in some way, maybe quote unquote off screen and on screen. But I also, some moments are from just conversations I've had with other women, with other people. And so the experiences definitely are not just, one speaker's, one person's, one poet's, like not all mine, in a lot of different ways. And so that was like a important part to it too in writing, was thinking about like a different approach in perspective, but also, sometimes like that different approach created something of a sameness, that I thought was also important to like express the, I don't want to say universalness of it, but the almost like a lot of people feel this way-ness of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a question from Jim. Great to hear you and your poems. With a hybrid project like you're describing, is it difficult to choose the order of poems as you're putting the book together?
Hi, Jim. Thanks so much for being here. Yes. Short answer, yes, it is difficult, especially the way the book really became one large poem. And so it's hard to even like, especially during the writing and editing process, it was almost hard to like remember what was there. And I've read the book like so many times throughout the editing process, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and like pull it up on my phone on my like Google Docs app to like read through it, because I was like, are you sure that's the order you want it to be in? And I think that a lot of that, most of it was sort of kind of going back to Allison's question of like, okay, well, what is the perspective of each section? What is the perspective as it like goes, as it progresses? And that was like a really helpful, I don't know, touchstone when doing the organizing. And then once the book in my mind was done and it was actually already accepted for publication, I was like, okay, actually there's something missing here. And I just wrote, I want to say it's the the penultimate, second to last section. I just was like, okay, there's like missing piece here. And I wrote it all together like over the course of like a couple of weeks, and that got put in. So that was really the only section that came together like as one. Everything else was a lot of swapping and thinking through.
There's a question from Miles. Thank you for sharing your work and experiences. Where do you find the inspiration to be so transparent? Who was your audience? Do you contemplate how you are received?
Yeah, okay, hi Miles, thanks for asking. Okay, so who's my audience? How can I be so transparent? And do I think through how I might be received? So I think for me, it was, before writing this book, I wrote, most of my poetry was sort of, I would say, like at arm's length. There were, topics and ideas that, felt really real to my personal experience, but I wasn't necessarily, having a marketing team saying it was part memoir, or was, putting in details that were really obviously personal, I guess. But as I mentioned, like after what happened in Geneseo, it was almost like this book was like, it's so gross. I always say it this way and it kind of grosses me out, but it's almost like I vomited this book out. It felt so like pressing on my like, my like writerly life that I almost felt like I had to say it. And in doing so, I think it offered like an access point to talk about, personal trauma and personal experience. And I think the way I was able to be transparent was I was just writing. I wasn't thinking about audience. I wasn't thinking about, at least not in like a real way. I wasn't thinking about like what would, not so much who would read it, but even how would people respond to it on that level. I was just doing it. And it really wasn't until like, I don't know, like a week before it was published that I came to terms with the fact that people would read it, and not just anybody would read it, but people who knew me would read it. And that was, that was hard. I'm not gonna lie, it was really hard. And I think too, for me, it's definitely an art, even though I am doing a lot of the work of like confessional poetry, and I definitely feel like my poetic ancestors are, like Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, and I think confessionalism is like definitely what I'm thinking about a lot when I write. I do think about it as art. I don't really think about writing as therapy or as like diary. And so that, maybe I'm like, that's how I sleep at night type of thing, but that allows me to like maintain, personal distance from it all in that sense. And then as to like who I think my audience is, I definitely think my audience is poets and people who write poetry, because and people who are interested in writing, because I am so fascinated by craft and by genre and these hybrid forms. And then of course I also really, on like a content level, I definitely feel like I wrote this book for like 17 to 20-year-old women. Maybe you can like you know, maybe it's like 14 to 22-year-olds or something like that. Like it's definitely, to me, that like sort of college young women set that I was thinking about when I was writing this. And of course, you know, an audience is way more expansive than that. But yeah, that was definitely like on the forefront of my mind when it came time to like that businessy, markety time. Yeah.
Thank you. So last question, what are you working on now?
Yeah, so well, you know, there's been a global pandemic, so it's kind of hard to be writing, honestly. It's just like a rough time, but I am working on a project and I want to continue working on this project that has a lot more to do with like family stories of immigration, and also it's like so just a little backstory. My family, my dad's side of the family immigrated here in like I don't know the 40s, 1940s from Sicily, and the like trajectory of my family since then is really fascinating to me, especially in its relation to whiteness, and how like these stories of immigration, I don't know, impact so much on like the generations that follow. And particularly for Sicilian Americans, I do think that the question of whiteness is something that's really unexamined and really not thought about. And it's so fascinating to me. So that's what that project is right now and what I'm thinking about. And it has a lot to do too with like Western art. I'm really interested particularly in paintings of Saint Agatha of Sicily and the way that she's portrayed in paintings. It's really fascinating to me in connection to all these other ideas. So I don't know, I hope it turns into something meaningful. I've been spending a lot of time on it, but you know, if it doesn't, it doesn't. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to see when it comes out. Lucia, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the book and I really enjoyed talking to you with it, about it. Hot with the Bad Things. You can buy it at Ampersand Books. Lucia's doing a workshop this weekend. Sign up at wab.org. Thanks for coming. And thank you, Lucia.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.